Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. Joining us is a very special guest, Lee Edwards, a leading historian of the conservative movement and a distinguished fellow in conservative thought at the Heritage Foundation. He is also an adjunct professor of politics at Catholic University and the author of several books. His newest is William F. Buckley Jr., the maker of a movement, about the man who has been called arguably the most important public intellectual in the United States in the past half-century. Welcome to Newsmax TV, Lee.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, for having me.
First, congratulations on the book. Talk to us about why you decided to write it and why a book on William F. Buckley Jr. is so relevant today.
Well, I felt that he was, of course, known as the editor of National Review, a columnist, a commentator, many, many things. But I wanted to focus on two things. Number one, I wanted to talk about his influence in making the conservative movement. How not only was he an intellectual, but he was an action intellectual. And through a series of political events and political acts, including the founding of National Review and running for mayor of New York City, that he contributed to the political dimension of the conservative movement. The other thing I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about and explore who were the influences on Bill Buckley, who were the intellectual people who influenced his thinking, his writing, and I came up with four men.
You touched upon these four men who influenced Mr. Buckley. What can you tell us about them, and what role did they play in shaping his philosophies and ideas?
Well, you think that maybe Bill Buckley just sort of emerged, from the sea like Venus, and that was Bill Buckley. But in point of fact, there were four men in particular who influenced his thinking, starting with Albert J. Nock, a very strong libertarian, when Bill Buckley was only a teenager and began reading Albert J. Nock's works. That contributed to the libertarian side of Bill Buckley. Then when he was at Yale, he met Wilmore Kendall. As a matter of fact, was a student of Wilmore Kendall, a conservative professor of political science, expert on the Constitution, and his influence, I think, contributed to the traditionally conservative side of Bill Buckley. And then a little bit later, Bill Buckley read and was influenced by, as a matter of fact, he was mesmerized by Witness by Whittaker Chambers, whom he called the most important American defector from communism. So that strengthened Bill Buckley's anti-communism. And then finally, when he founded National Review, looking around for senior editors to help him edit the magazine, he settled upon James Burnham, a professor of philosophy at New York University, a supreme intellectual, but also a realist when it came to looking at both foreign policy and domestic policy, so that Burnham's realism tempered Bill Buckley's idealism, and I think also that of the conservative movement.
You were a close friend of William Buckley. For those who don't know, what kind of man was he, and how did he build the conservative movement?
Well, I knew Bill back from when I was a young man. As a matter of fact, he published my first article in National Review. I might be a failed novelist and poet today if it weren't for him putting me in the right direction to writing nonfiction and articles and political articles for the most part. He's an enormously generous man, a good friend, someone who, if you had a problem or if you needed some counsel or even some help, you could go to him, and if he possibly could, he would help you. One of my favorite stories is that he was visiting a Vietnam veteran in Texas, whom we did not know. The veteran was told that he was blind permanently, and that would be the end of the story. And yet Bill Buckley arranged for him to be flown at his expense to New York City, put in touch with some eye surgeons, and as a result of that, that young man recovered his sight. So that's the kind of thing that Bill Buckley did, I think, practicing that very Christian virtue of charity throughout his life.
Mr. Edwards, what parallels do you see between what the conservative movement was experiencing in Mr. Buckley's time and today?
Well, I think the conservative movement is always engaged in a very spirited debate, shall we say. What should be its intellectual makeup? If you go back and look at the 1950s and the 1960s, when Bill Buckley was getting started, you'll see that there were tremendous arguments going on between the libertarians and the traditional conservatives. So I'm not at all, as a matter of fact, I welcome the kind of spirited debate that we're having among all the various branches of conservatism, the traditional conservatives, the social conservatives, the neoconservatives, the national security conservatives, and so on and on and on, because I think that coming out of that kind of debate are the right kind of balance, the right kind of philosophical balance and political balance, if you will, as well, which will contribute to conservatism being what it has been in the past, and that is a governing majority in America.
In the early 1950s, Mr. Buckley observed that the right lacked focus and cohesion, which is something critics say that conservatism has struggled with in recent years. What would William Buckley Jr. say about the shape of modern conservatism, and what would he do to help conservatives regain their footing?
Well, Bill Buckley, I think, embodied the idea of what we call fusionism, the idea of blending the various mainstreams of conservatism, as I say, traditional, libertarian, social, neo, national security, and so forth. And he would always say that politics is a matter of addition and not of subtraction. And so looking at where the conservative movement is today, I think he would reach out with open arms, for example, to the Tea Party movement. I see many, many parallels, as a matter of fact, between Bill Buckley and the Tea Party movement, if you think about it. The Tea Partiers are what? Well, they're against the establishment. So was Bill Buckley. They're for limited government. So was Bill Buckley. They were also not necessarily committed to just one party. There are Democrats as well as Republicans within the Tea Party people. And Bill Buckley also was very careful, although choosing the Republican Party as the main political vehicle, to maintain good relations with Democrats, for example, like Joe Lieberman. So I think that he would be very comfortable and would cheer on the Tea Partiers. After all, we have to remember that Bill Buckley, in a debate at Harvard University on the role of government, looked out at the audience filled with all of these faculty members and said, well, I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston telephone directory than the Harvard faculty. I think that indicates exactly how he would have welcomed the kind of challenge, the kind of boisterousness, the kind of spirited debate that the Tea Party people are bringing to the political debate today.
How do you think he would unite these different factions to achieve electoral victory?
Well, I think first of all, he would make sure that there are no extremists. This is one of the things that he made a signal contribution to back in the 50s and the 60s, and that was particularly was saying there was no room in the conservative movement, the responsible conservative movement, for the John Birch Society. Robert Welch, the founder of that particular organization, which was gaining some importance within the conservative movement, believed and wrote and said that the U.S. government was 50 to 60 to 70% communist controlled. As Bill Buckley pointed out, that would mean that the U.S. government was merely a pawn of the conservative of the Communist Party. So he would say, get rid of the extremists. At the same time, don't engage in ad hominem arguments and ad hominem vitriol and rhetoric. Stick to principles, stick to ideas, bring people together and group them around ideas like limited government, individual responsibility, free enterprise, and the other basic ideas of conservatism.
Conservatism means a lot of different things to different people. What do you think it means to be a conservative today? And to what extent has the election of President Obama, considered by many to be an extreme radical, how has his election changed conservatism at all?
Well, I think what it's done is to present to conservatism Mr. Obama's victory, maybe the biggest challenge of its existence of the last 50, 60 years. What is going to be the conservative response to what Mr. Obama is doing, which is not only progressive, but far beyond that, far beyond just a welfare society. He's trying to turn this into a European democratic socialist society and government. So what are conservatives going to do? How are they going to respond to this? They're going to have to dig down deep into their ideas, come up with the right kind of leadership, the right kind of candidates, and present a united front, not a divided front, but a united front against this challenge from Obama and the rest of the progressives today.
Now, Republicans hope to take back the House and perhaps the Senate, too. Do you think the GOP will achieve that? And what are Republicans' chances for a presidential win in 2012?
Well, obviously, there's a reaction going on. You can see that in the very existence of the Tea Party movement, which we don't know exactly how. There may be 2,000, there may be 3,000 organizations now in the town halls, and the various victories which have been achieved in Massachusetts and Virginia and New Jersey, and even the defeat in Pennsylvania of the old-timer switching parties and so forth. So it is possible for a strong Republican advance in the House of Representatives and also in the Senate. But I think we have to be careful, and I think Bill Buckley, as an action intellectual, would counsel this, not to get caught up just in winning elections, but trying to undergird those candidacies and those elections and those winners with ideas, the right ideas, conservative ideas based upon the founding, what we call first principles. Doing that, then I think we can begin to turn around this country and get it in the right direction again, not on the road to serfdom, but on the road to liberty.
Now, among the conservatives, who do you feel best identifies with the ideas of Bill Buckley and conservatism, and who has the best shot at taking on President Obama should he choose to run for re-election?
Well, it's a good question, Kathleen, but I'm an historian and a biographer, not a prophet or a seer, so I'd be reluctant. But I think there are a number of very good possibilities out there. And I look to the House of Representatives. I think that someone like Paul Ryan, for example, is a rising star. Mike Pence, another rising star. I think that also you must take a look at those who have run before, Mitt Romney and others. And I think also it's very important not to take Governor Palin and try to put her in some kind of category as an untouchable. I think it's an enormous mistake. What we have to do, as I say, is to reach out, bring all of these various candidates with all of their ideas together. Let's have a free and open debate through the primary system and through the other means that we have to arrive at a candidate. And I think there's a real possibility of defeating Mr. Obama in 2012.
What is your take on Sarah Palin? Critics have said that she is a model conservative. Do you agree with that?
Well, I wouldn't call her necessarily a model conservative. I don't think she probably has done much reading of some of the classic works, such as The Road to Serfdom or The Conservative Mind or Ideas Have Consequences, all of which make up the conservative canon for most people. But I do think she's a natural communicator. And what I think we need to do is to surround her with the best possible advice, encourage her, keep her going, take advantage of her energy, her enthusiasm, her ability to communicate, and make sure that she remains one of the leaders of the conservative movement.
What challenges do you see ahead for the conservative movement?
Well, I think it's so easy on the one hand to get discouraged. We can look at the fact that for some 70 or 80 years we've had a welfare state in America, and it's very easy to say, well, that's it. We can just, all we can do is settle back and maybe live in a compound somewhere, or talk about moving to New Zealand or some other place. That's not realistic. What we have to do is to realize that, as T.S. Eliot said, there are no loss causes because there are no gain causes. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. That's a wonderful statement by Jefferson some 200 some years ago. It still applies today. We have to get to work, take care that our ideas get to not only the immediate public in America, but to our young people. We must communicate these ideas of limited government and free enterprise and individual freedom and responsibility to young people to make sure that they can carry on and preserve that freedom that we've worked so hard to retain.
All right, the book is William F. Buckley Jr., The Maker of a Movement, by famed conservative historian Lee Edwards. Lee, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your stories of Mr. Buckley.
Thank you so much and for having me, Kathleen.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.